At 4:27 in the afternoon, thousands of shoppers were walking through a crowded mall in southern Japan when the ground beneath them simply stopped behaving like ground. Within seconds, shelves emptied themselves onto the floor, ceiling panels rained down, and a sound like a freight train rolled through the building. Then, almost as the shaking eased, a second, sharper sound tore through the structure. An explosion ripped through part of the mall, white smoke poured from the wreckage, and the second floor gave way, burying people who had no warning it was coming. What had already been one of the most powerful earthquakes to hit Japan in years had just become something far deadlier. This happened on July 28, 2026, in Kumamoto Prefecture, on the southern Japanese island of Kyushu. The Japan Meteorological Agency measured the quake at a preliminary magnitude of 7.1, striking at a shallow depth of roughly 10 to 16 kilometers, with its epicenter just east of the city of Uto. The United States Geological Survey, which calculates magnitude using a different method, recorded it as a 6.8. Both figures describe the same event. They simply reflect two separate scientific scales measuring the same violent release of energy along a fault line that has haunted this region before. The shaking reached Shindo 7, the highest level on Japan's seismic intensity scale, in the towns of Uki and Hikawa. Shindo 7 does not just mean strong tremors. It means the kind of F shaking that can throw people off their feet, topple reinforced structures, and trigger landslides on unstable ground. Kumamoto City itself, along with Yatsushiro, Uto, Misato, and Mashiki, registered Shindo 6 upper, still powerful enough to collapse older buildings and rupture underground gas and water lines. For a region already scarred by a devastating earthquake sequence a decade earlier, this was a sickening echo of history repeating itself. The most catastrophic single incident of the day unfolded at Aeon Mall Kumamoto in the town of Kashima. According to the mall's operating company, roughly 3,000 customers were evacuated to the parking lot as the shaking hit, following standard emergency protocol. But not everyone made it out before the situation turned lethal. In another part of the building, while employees were still working, an explosion tore through the structure. A senior Japanese government official later stated that reports indicated a gas leak had occurred, most likely triggered by ruptured piping during the earthquake, though the precise cause was still under investigation in the days that followed. Teehee blast caused the mall's second floor to collapse onto the level below, trapping shoppers and workers beneath twisted steel, broken concrete, and shattered glass. Rescue crews described a devastating scene of search and recovery. Soldiers and emergency workers combed through the wreckage for days, cutting through debris by hand in places too unstable for heavy machinery. As of the early hours after the disaster, 6 people had already been confirmed dead at the mall site alone, among 11 pulled from the rubble. 4 additional survivors were transported to hospitals still conscious, giving rescuers a narrow window of hope even as the odds of finding more. Survivors diminished with every passing hour. The mall's president bowed deeply before cameras at a press conference, acknowledging that lives had been lost and that the company took the explosion seriously. The human toll across the wider disaster zone climbed steadily and painfully over the following days. Official counts moved from 13 confirmed deaths in the immediate aftermath to 18, then 25, then 30, and finally to 35 confirmed fatalities in Kumamoto Prefecture, according to prefectural authorities and Japanese broadcaster NHK. Some of those deaths were still being investigated to confirm a direct link to the earthquake, a grim but standard part of disaster record-keeping in Japan, where deaths from heart attacks, hypothermia, or complications during evacuation are carefully assessed before being formally attributed to a disaster. Dozens more people were injured, some critically, in collapsed houses, falling debris, and the mall collapse itself. The destruction extended well beyond the mall. An aerial image captured the damaged chimney of the Nippon Paper Industries factory in Yatsushiro, a structure that had partially crumbled under the force of the shaking. Authorities later confirmed that all workers at that site had been safely rescued, a rare piece of good news amid the grim daily updates. Elsewhere, homes across Uki, Yatsushiro, and surrounding towns collapsed entirely, leaving elderly residents like 74-year-old Kiyoshi Matsunaga, who was pushing his shopping cart toward a checkout counter when the earthquake struck, convinced in that moment that he was going to die. Fires broke out in Kumamoto City, the prefectural capital, complicating an already chaotic emergency response. Roads buckled, rail lines were suspended, and dozens of sections of the Minami-Kyushu Expressway were closed for safety inspections. Even Kumamoto Castle, a centuries-old symbol of the city and a monument still undergoing restoration from catastrophic damage sustained in the 2016 Kumamoto earthquakes, was struck again. Stone walls collapsed at roughly 40 separate locations around the castle grounds. The restoration project, which had been expected to reach completion only in 2052, absorbed yet another setback, a quiet but powerful symbol of how repeatedly this land has had to rebuild itself. The scale of the emergency response reflected the severity of the disaster. Japan's Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, established an extraordinary disaster management headquarters within hours of the quake, personally chairing the government's coordinated response. More than 4,600 self-defense forces, personnel and approximately 480 police officers from 11 prefectures were deployed to the disaster zone, including roughly 170 soldiers assigned specifically to the collapsed Aeon Mall site. Power outages affected tens of thousands of homes. Dozens of medical institutions across Kumamoto Prefecture reported disruptions to electricity, water, or gas service, straining hospitals at the exact moment they were needed most. Postal services shut down across the prefecture, and cellular network disruptions plagued the Yatsushiro area, cutting off some residents from emergency communication entirely. A tsunami advisory was also issued within 2 minutes of the earthquake, covering the Ariake and Yatsushiro seas along the western coastlines of Kumamoto, Nagasaki, Fukuoka, and Saga prefectures, warning of potential waves up to 1 meter high. Prime Minister Takaichi urged coastal residents to move away from the shoreline immediately. The advisory was lifted roughly 2 hours later after no significant wave activity was recorded. But for those 2 hours, residents already reeling from a Shindo 7 earthquake had to simultaneously prepare for the possibility of incoming water. To understand why this region keeps being struck by earthquakes of this severity, it helps to understand the ground it sits on. Kumamoto Prefecture lies at the southern terminus of the median tectonic line, the longest active fault system in Japan. Near Kumamoto, this fault system splits into a network of interconnected faults, including the Futagawa Fault to the north and the Hinagu Fault to the south, both of which run directly beneath populated areas of the prefecture. These are strike-slip faults, meaning the two sides of the fault grind horizontally past one another, rather than one plate diving beneath the other, similar in mechanism to California's San Andreas Fault. Initial seismic analysis of the July 2026 event confirmed that this earthquake was indeed a strike-slip rupture, consistent with movement along this same fault network. This is not unfamiliar territory for tragedy. In April 2016, this same broader region was struck by a sequence of powerful earthquakes, including a magnitude 7.3 main shock, that together killed more than 50 people, injured close to 1,800 others, and destroyed or damaged tens of thousands of homes. The Japan Meteorological Agency noted that the epicenter of the 2026 earthquake sat southwest of the main source area of that 2016 sequence, meaning this was a related but geologically distinct rupture along the same broader fault system, rather than a simple repeat of the earlier disaster. For residents who lived through 2016 and were only beginning to see landmarks like Kumamoto Castle restored, the psychological weight of experiencing this kind of destruction twice within a single decade is difficult to overstate. In the immediate aftermath, seismologists at the Japan Meteorological Agency did not simply tally the damage and move on. They issued a direct, urgent warning to residents of the region. Shinji Kiyomoto, the agency's earthquake and tsunami countermeasures planning officer, told reporters that the shallow depth of the earthquake was actively triggering ongoing seismic activity throughout the area, and he specifically urged residents to remain cautious over the following 2 to 3 days, citing the heightened risk of another powerful quake striking the Sam region. This was not speculation or fear-mongering. It reflected established seismological understanding that a major rupture along a fault system frequently destabilizes surrounding sections of that same fault, increasing the short-term probability of additional strong earthquakes and aftershocks in the immediate vicinity. That warning proved well-founded. Japan's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism recorded 48 earthquakes of Shindo 3 or greater within the first 20 hours following the main shock alone, including one additional Shindo 7 event, 3 at Shindo 5 lower, 11 at Shindo 4, and 33 at Shindo 3. Over the following days, the total number of recorded aftershocks climbed past 250, with several individual aftershocks exceeding magnitude 6. For rescue workers attempting to stabilize the collapsed sections of Aeon Mall and pull survivors from the wreckage, each new aftershock brought fresh danger, threatening to bring down already weakened structures on top of both victims and rescuers alike. This pattern of relentless seismic activity is not unique to Kumamoto, and it is not unique to 2026. Japan sits atop the intersection of 4 major tectonic plates: the Pacific Plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the North American Plate, positioning the entire archipelago directly within the Pacific Ring of Fire, the horseshoe-shaped zone, responsible for roughly 90% of the world's earthquakes. As a direct consequence of this geology, Japan experiences approximately 1,500 earthquakes every year, the overwhelming majority too small to be felt by people at all, but a persistent minority powerful enough to cause real damage. Just months before the Kumamoto disaster, in April 2026, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake struck off the Sanriku coast of northern Honshu, triggering tsunami warnings across Iwate, Aomori, and Hokkaido prefectures, and producing an 80-centimeter tsunami that struck Tarimyo-Wat-hi coastal town of Kuji. That earthquake followed more than 160 foreshocks recorded in the preceding months, including a magnitude 6.8 event the previous November, a sequence that seismologists were monitoring closely even before the larger rupture occurred. Taken individually, each of these earthquakes has its own specific cause, tied to the particular fault or subduction zone beneath it. But taken together, they form part of a pattern that has drawn increasing attention from Japanese seismologists over the past 2 years, centered on a single, looming concern that dwarfs even the destruction seen in Kumamoto. That concern is the Nankai Trough. The Nankai Trough is a massive undersea subduction zone, stretching roughly 700 to 800 kilometers along Japan's Pacific coastline, running from Shizuoka Prefecture west of Tokyo all the way to the southern tip of Kyushu, passing directly beneath the waters near where the Kumamoto earthquake struck. Along this trough, the Philippine Sea Plate is slowly diving beneath the Japanese mainland, and the friction generated by that collision has, throughout recorded history, built up and violently released as some of the most powerful earthquakes ever documented in Japan. According to Japan's government-run Earthquake Research Committee, severe earthquakes along the Nankai Trough have occurred with grim regularity roughly every 100 to 200 years. In 1707, every segment of the trough ruptured, simultaneously in what remains the second most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japanese history. An event so violent, it also triggered the last confirmed eruption of Mount Fuji. That catastrophic rupture was followed by paired megathrust earthquakes in 1854, and then again in a pair of quakes in 1944 and 1946. That last pair of earthquakes occurred nearly 80 years ago, which places Japan squarely within the historical window in which the next Nankai Trough megaquake could plausibly occur. Japan's government has stated publicly, based on this recurrence interval, that there is a 70 to 80% probability of another Nankai Trough earthquake striking within the next 30 years, with an expected magnitude somewhere between 8 and 9, an order of magnitude more powerful than the earthquake that just devastated Kumamoto. In a worst-case scenario modeled by Japanese government planners, such an earthquake could kill upward of 300,000 people and cause economic damage, estimated by some engineers at up to $13 trillion, driven not only by the shaking itself, but by the massive tsunami. Such a rupture would almost certainly generate along Japan's densely populated Pacific coast, potentially reaching heights of over 20 meters in some areas and threatening parts of Tokyo itself. This is not a hypothetical risk conjured for dramatic effect. In August 2024, following a magnitude 7.1 earthquake off the coast of Miyazaki Prefecture in Kyushu, the Japan Meteorological Agency issued its first ever formal megaquake advisory for the Nankai Trough, a precautionary alert indicating that seismic conditions suggested an elevated, though still statistically low, short-term probability of a major rupture. The advisory prompted Japan's then Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, to cancel an international trip and remain in the country to oversee preparedness efforts. Seismologists were careful to clarify, both then and since, that such an advisory does not mean a devastating earthquake will definitely occur within any specific window of time. As geologists Kyle Bradley and Judith Hubbard, who study the region closely, have written, earthquake prediction in the precise moment-to-moment sense remains scientifically impossible. What is possible and well established is that the occurrence of one significant earthquake in an active seismic zone does measurably raise the statistical likelihood of another following in the surrounding region, which is precisely why the Nankai Trough continues to be described by researchers as the most long-anticipated earthquake in the world, the original definition of Japan's big one. It is important to be precise here, because it is easy for this kind of story to blur separate scientific facts into a single, more frightening narrative than the evidence actually supports. The Kumamoto earthquake of July 2026 struck along the Hinagu and Futagawa fault system, part of the median tectonic line, a shallow inland strike-slip fault entirely distinct from the offshore Nankai Trough subduction zone. Scientists have not stated that the Kumamoto earthquake directly triggered or caused a Nankai Trough megaquake, nor is there evidence establishing a direct mechanical link forcing one to follow the other. What connects them is geographic proximity and a shared identity as products of the same broader tectonic environment. A nation built directly atop one of the most seismically volatile junctions on Earth, where multiple independent fault systems and subduction zones exist in close proximity to one another and to Japan's population centers. The specific warning issued by the Japan Meteorological Agency after the Kumamoto earthquake about a heightened risk of further strong aftershocks over the following 2 to 3 days, was a targeted, evidence-based statement about that particular fault system, grounded in the same seismological principles that inform Japan's much longer-term concern about the Nankai Trough. What makes this pattern genuinely alarming to scientists is not any single prediction of doom, but the accumulation of stress indicators across multiple systems simultaneously. Researchers at the University of Tokyo's Institute of Industrial Science recently published new seafloor geodesy data from the Nankai Trough, using over a decade of precise ocean floor displacement data. Measurements to map previously unknown variations and how tightly different sections of the trough remain locked together, a key factor in determining where and how future rupture might occur. This kind of research does not tell scientists exactly when the next great earthquake will strike, but it sharpens the picture of where stress is accumulating fastest, allowing Japanese authorities to refine evacuation planning, building codes, and public advisories with increasing precision. Combined with the Sanriku earthquake in April, the Kumamoto disaster in July, and the ongoing background hum of aftershocks and minor tremors recorded across the country every single day, 2026 has already served as a stark reminder that Japan's relationship with the ground beneath it is never truly settled. And yet, amid all of this, it would be a mistake to view Japan purely as a nation waiting helplessly for catastrophe. Despite sitting atop one of the most seismically active regions on the planet, Japan has also become the world's most sophisticated example of earthquake preparedness. Its buildings are engineered to some of the strictest seismic codes on Earth, incorporating base isolation systems, tuned mass dampers, and flexible structural designs specifically intended to absorb and dissipate the energy of violent shaking rather than resist it rigidly and fail. Its early warning systems can detect the first, faster-moving seismic waves of an earthquake and issue public alerts, sometimes with just seconds of lid time, but often enough to allow trains to slow, elevators to stop at the nearest floor, and surgeons to pause delicate operations before the more destructive shaking arrives. Regular, mandatory disaster drills are woven into Japanese school curricula and workplace culture from an early age, producing a population that, however frightened, tends to respond to emergencies with practiced discipline rather than panic. The rapid deployment of thousands of self-defense forces personnel, the swift establishment of a national disaster response headquarters, and the coordinated multi-prefecture police response seen in Kumamoto within hours of the July 2026 quake are direct products of decades of institutional investment in disaster readiness, built on hard lessons learned from previous tragedies including the 1995 Kobe earthquake and the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. One of the clearest examples of that preparedness in action played out at the Sendai nuclear power plant in neighboring Kagoshima Prefecture, roughly 100 kilometers south of the worst-hit areas of Kumamoto. Within the first hours after the quake, plant operators and government regulators confirmed that no abnormalities had been detected at the facility's 2 reactors, a detail that mattered enormously given Japan's painful history with earthquake-triggered nuclear incidents. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which led to the meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, fundamentally reshaped how seriously Japanese regulators treat seismic risk assessments for critical infrastructure. Every nuclear facility in the country now operates under significantly stricter seismic resilience standards than existed before that disaster, and the routine rapid safety confirmation issued after the Kumamoto quake reflects just how deeply that lesson has been institutionalized. The economic disruption from the earthquake rippled outward almost immediately. Shinkansen bullet train service between Fukuoka and Kumamoto was suspended pending safety inspections of the track and surrounding infrastructure, while service further south between Kumamoto and Kagoshima remained closed entirely in the days following the disaster. The Nishi-Kyushu Shinkansen line connecting Saga and Nagasaki continued operating normally, a small but telling detail that illustrated how localized the most severe damage remained, concentrated heavily around the fault rupture itself rather than spread evenly across the island. Sections of the Minami-Kyushu Expressway stayed closed for structural inspection, disrupting freight and passenger traffic throughout the region, while damaged post offices, banks, and medical facilities compounded the difficulty of returning life to anything resembling normal. Kumamoto City, with a population of roughly 700,000 people, effectively absorbed a multi-day disruption to nearly every category of essential infrastructure at once. The earthquake's shaking was powerful enough to be felt well beyond Japan's own borders, registering across parts of South Korea, a reminder of just how much energy a magnitude 7.1 rupture releases, even when the epicenter sits far from any international boundary. For comparison, the energy released by a magnitude 7.1 earthquake is roughly 32 times greater than that of a magnitude 6.1 event, and nearly 1,000 times greater than a magnitude 5.1 tremor, since the Richter and moment magnitude scales are logarithmic rather than linear. That exponential relationship helps explain why the difference between the Kumamoto earthquake and a hypothetical future Henkai trough rupture at magnitude 8 or 9 is not simply a matter of degree, but an almost incomprehensible leap in destructive potential, involving tens to hundreds of times more energy release along a fault line, many times longer than the one that ruptured beneath Kyushu in July. Still, engineering and preparation have limits, and the events in Kumamoto illustrated exactly where those limits sit. A shopping mall built to modern seismic codes can survive violent shaking and still be destroyed by a secondary hazard, like a ruptured gas line and the explosion it triggers. A reminder that earthquake resilience is not just about structural strength against shaking alone, but about an entire web of interconnected infrastructure, from gas piping to electrical systems to water mains, all of which must survive simultaneously for a disaster to be contained rather than compounded. Investigators examining the Aeon Mall explosion in the weeks following the disaster faced the difficult task of tracing exactly how a gas leak developed, why it ignited, and what specific failures, if any, could be addressed to prevent similar secondary disasters. The next time a major earthquake strikes a densely built urban or commercial area, whether in Kumamoto or elsewhere in Japan, for the families of the 35 people confirmed dead in Kumamoto Prefecture, and for the many more who spent days trapped, injured, or displaced, the scientific and geological explanations, however precise, offer limited comfort. What they experienced was a matter of seconds, the ground giving way beneath a shopping center on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, followed by an explosion that turned a public evacuatio, and into a mass casualty event. Recovery in Kumamoto will not be measured only in rebuilt buildings and repaired highways, but in the slower, harder work of restoring a sense of safety to a region that has now had that safety violently stripped away twice within a single decade. Kumamoto Castle, still standing despite everything, undergoing yet another round of repairs to walls first. Damaged in 2016 and now damaged again in 2026, stands as an almost unintentional monument to that resilience, a structure that keeps being knocked down and keeps being rebuilt, much like the community surrounding it. Japanese disaster researchers often point out that memory itself is a form of protection. Communities that have lived through a major earthquake within living memory tend to maintain higher levels of household emergency preparedness, from stocked supply kits to rehearsed evacuation routes, than communities where the last major disaster happened generations ago. Kumamoto, having endured the 2016 sequence, and now the 2026 earthquake within the span of a single decade, finds itself in the difficult position of having that memory refreshed twice, at enormous human cost. Whether that shared, painful experience translates into stronger long-term resilience for the region remains to be seen. But Japan's national government has already signaled its intent to review building codes for large commercial structures like Aeon Mall, specifically examining how gas infrastructure is routed and shut off automatically during major seismic events, in hopes of preventing a secondary explosion from ever again compounding the damage of an earthquake itself. The broader warning from Japan's scientific community is neither an announcement that a specific catastrophic earthquake is imminent, nor a dismissal of the risk as remote and distant. It is something more nuanced, a net vigilance in a country that already understands, perhaps better than any other nation on earth, that the ground it stands on offers no guarantees. The Nankai Trough has not moved in its full catastrophic form since 1946. The statistical clock, built on centuries of documented recurrence, continues to tick forward. Whether the next major rupture comes in 5 years or 50, Japan's earthquake scientists continue urging the same message they issued in the immediate hours after Kumamoto's ground stopped shaking. Stay prepared, stay informed, and never assume the worst has already passed. If this deep dive into the science and human cost behind Japan's latest earthquake disaster gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening beneath one of the most seismically active nations on Earth, Maki. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next investigation into the natural forces shaping our world. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Japan's earthquake preparedness, and share this video with someone who needs to understand why scientists are watching this region so closely. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.